Okay, hello to our online viewers. Thank you guys for waiting for so long. As you know, this is also a live event, so this is really awesome because we get to see Bruce Lee right behind us.
Welcome to Happy Homes and Gardens. I'm your host. My name is Daphne Royce. I'm a real estate broker, architecture, and interior designer. When people mentioned Kung Fu, the first person that comes to mind is probably Bruce Lee. Martial art played a prominent role in the genre of the literature known as
WuXia.
WuXia.
Yes.
WuXia has thousands of years of a history that probably go back as far as at 2nd or 3rd century BC. Payhuan is a CEO of Immortal Studios, and he wants to position the Chinese genre of literature for the next 1,000 years. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, that's kind of a really loud claim in this kind of context. So welcome everybody. My name is Payhuan Shiao. I run a company called Immortal Studios. You mentioned Bruce Lee, and I think it's a very appropriate conversation. It's almost, this place feels like a church, so it almost feels like the church of Bruce Lee. And Bruce Lee is by definitely the brightest star that we've seen within our lifetime in this unbroken lineage of Wuxia. So Wu in Chinese means martial, Xia is heroes. So the martial hero, it's kind of, and it's synonymous with Kung Fu, just like rap would be synonymous with hip hop. Of course, hip hop is a larger conversation than just rap. And just like Wuxia is a larger conversation than Kung Fu. So there's a lineage, because I think as long as humans have been around, there's been tyranny, there's been injustice, there's been abuse of power. And the need for heroes have naturally arisen out of that need and vacuum for injustice. And it just so happened that it took place in this ancient Chinese civilization where there's also a concurrent phenomenon of people becoming superheroes by practicing, by uniting their minds, bodies, and spirits. And in the process, they become superhumans. So if you look at history, especially Chinese history, it's not littered. It's populated with a lot of these real-life stories. So something happened when these real-life practitioners of these transcendent ways started to do things actively for the benefit of the people, to push back against injustice and tyranny, while promoting consciousness and enlightenment. These stories inspired people, or they helped people. They inspired storytellers. They became part of the culture, and that culture traveled and traveled while this kind of continuation of Kung Fu continued. And then Bruce Lee was also someone who was deeply inspired in this unbroken line of storytelling. And he became what he's become, and within these walls talks about his becoming. But let's be clear that there's he is a great star in a constellation of many, many different characters, many, many different people. And Bruce Lee was a really pivotal moment for the modernization of this movement, and also for the globalization, because he also broke rules. He started to teach Kung Fu to non-Chinese people. He really brought it to the world. He used the power of cinema and storytelling to take it to the next level, and here we are today. And I consider what we do at Immortal kind of as turning the page on, or standing on the shoulders of giants that Bruce Lee's created. But let's also be clear that this has been a movement that's been going on, as you said, Rose, for thousands of years. And that there are also many other greats within Asia, within China, within so many different cultures. So, and we're kind of living in this moment where it seems to be all coming together.
So what do you think Bruce Lee's legend lived on for many generations? Why is that?
I think Bruce Lee captured something amazing. I mean, everyone has a Bruce Lee story, so I'll just be personal. As a Chinese American kid growing up, or even let's peel back. It's not just the Chinese American kid. I think for the average Chinese person to be alive in this century, in this past century, it's a feeling of defeat and humiliation and not mattering, being very inconsequential. Your nation has been defeated. Your cultural values are diminished. And for those of us who live in the Western world, we lived lives that were, considered lesser than. And the fact that a person like him who was rejected by everybody and became the protagonist, became the hero, not just within his own life, but was able to project that spirit onto the world and the stories, that was electrifying. And I think, and it rang true for not just the Chinese people, but it started with China because he was thoroughly rejected in Hollywood. As a Chinese American, he had to really go back to Asia where he would eventually find it, but that repressed and suppressed, disrespected people everywhere identified with him and his plight, and that sense of rage and that power and that empowerment, coupled with his philosophy, really, really awakened a strong interest. But that was also part of a larger wave of wuxia cinema, wuxia films and storytelling, just kind of flooding the universe. So it's against this entire backdrop that Bruce Lee emerged. But I would say today, one of the things that I believe in, as a student of Bruce Lee, I'm also as a lifelong adherent to this unbroken lineage of wuxia and the ideas that they stand for, that we live in unprecedented times, just like Mark was talking about earlier. A lot of the things that Bruce Lee really talked about, he didn't really get a chance to live out and act out in terms of characters and storytelling and worlds and philosophies and ideals. They were never really embodied in storytelling because he was never able to break beyond the I'm angry, I'm rageful, I'm going to take you down because you're doing something unjust. We never got beyond that chapter to see the whole, the beauty, the philosophy, the transcendence, the power of that entire world. So I think we now have the opportunity to do so, and I think the larger societal environment is ready.
Would you please tell us a little bit about you and how you started Immortal Studio?
It's a longer story. I feel like I've lived 5 or 6 different lifetimes. I'm a serial founder and producer. I actually grew up in Hollywood, so my first career was actually in politics. And after a career in politics, I woke up one day when I was ready to run for office here in California. I had an awakening that the things that I wanted to accomplish politically really felt to be more about changing people's perceptions and not really limited to one district or one area, and that was my awakening. It's like, wow, if I really think about what my political ideals and goals was really that's probably better accomplished through storytelling. So that was what started it all. I decided to not run for office. I decided to produce movies. I decided to be an entrepreneur. And 7 companies later, I've been a movie producer. I've created multiple films and stories, IPs, games, and founded companies in technology and culture, and kind of brought me to this point where I'm ready to be a studio head. And I'm ready to really stand up for the values and beliefs and these guiding principles that have been with me since birth.
But why wuxia?
Because it's badass and it's awesome. Look, I have a deep relationship to wuxia, and my father was one of the top creators in the wuxia genre. His name is Xiao Yi. There's a saying in China, Nanjing Beishou, people in the south read Jingyong, wuxia, and people from the north, like my father, Xiao Yi. So he's a phenomenal creator, and he raised me like I lived in ancient China. My first books were wuxia novels, were Journey to the West. So, and his friends were real living masters. So it was almost like from the time before I was born, I was surrounded by this world, and he taught me so much. He was my teacher, he was my master, became my mentor, and then friend, and then collaborator. So it's like a deep, deep part of me. And as an adult person, I think fate also has something to do with it. Under really mysterious circumstances, about 15 years ago, I actually met the abbot of the Shaolin Temple. We became friends, we were giving concurrent speeches at some ancient mountains in China. I was talking about the power of movies, and he was talking about the power of Zen. We became friends. He invited me to visit him in the Shaolin Temple, and I did. And before you know it, I'm inducting the secret Shaolin manuals to the Library of Congress together. So the kind of work that we're able to do to really stand for that. So it's like a deeply emotional thing, and so my father taught me a lot of the ideas, the beauties, the aesthetics, the poetry, the culture, and then later on, and as an adult, I became an actual practitioner. So I stand here as a student of Wing Chun, as a practitioner of Shaolin, where I really believe that WuXia has these beautiful transformative powers that we're starting to just really scratching at the surface of. And the vapidness of just storytelling for money, or for numbing, for nihilism, that is pervasive through all storytelling right now, and that WuXia's time has come. My father has always taught me that, it's really times of bleakness and darkness that the hero emerges. And when I look at the global sphere in pop culture, that's what I see, that's what I feel, and I believe that WuXia has a beautiful, empowering, transformative message. And we're here as a company, as an individual, to stand for that.
Can you describe the significance of WuXia and their characters?
Our mission at Immortal is to awaken the hero in everybody, and I think that's the key message. That's why it's the most popular form of fiction for everybody, because through the plight of these people, let's just call them zeros, because the story of being from, like in the Marvel universe, it's about being bitten by a radioactive spider, or you get some cosmic goop on you, you get visited by aliens, and then you kind of have these inexplicable strengths. But WuXia is really about harnessing your own capabilities, your own strength, your own spirit, and you commit to that. And through self-mastery, you become the hero that you've been waiting for. So if you could distill it down, if you can distill WuXia down, that is the journey. That is the journey, and that it's a really powerful message that we are the ones that we've been waiting for. And so when you democratize this against different characters, different stories, be they handicapped, be they underprivileged or privileged, whatever the case is, because we all have that person that we really want to become, the contribution we want to make, and our version of WuXia is really the storytelling that unleashes that. And the beauty of WuXia is that it's not just grounded, it's not based in some creative's head, that this is actually stuff that's been tried and true for thousands of years, so that the words, the practices, the ideas, the philosophies have real power.
I'm sure you read a lot of WuXia fantasy stories. Do you have any favorite novel that you want to share with our audience?
I do. I've read almost most of the WuXia classics at least a few times. And I actually, I would say I have one of the best collections of WuXia novels in the world. I have an entire WuXia library, so I reread a lot of them. But it comes down to my favorite two favorites. You have to back your own father, so my dad's my favorite. And Jin Yong would be my second. And my favorite book that my father's ever written is called The Chronicles of the Immortal Swordsman, that I've actually had a chance to adapt. I actually, in a previous incarnation, sold it to Lionsgate as a movie producer. I bought it back, I bought back all the rights, and I made it the spine of the Immortal Universe. And I had a chance to work with the story that really inspired me as a little boy to be the main through line in this interconnected universe we've built. So for those of you who have this little page, it's called Chronicles of the Immortal Swordsman. You can also see the pages right here. So I not only got to play with my favorite story, I got to write it, I got to update it, and I got to, instead of this kid in an ancient mountains of China, I made him a Chinese American kid like me growing up in LA. So in a way, I was able to live the ultimate dream in connecting my love of story and character into something that I'm actually creating in real life.
Is that in connection with your Immortal Studio? Is that where your name come from?
It is, because we talk about wuxia, and I think a lot of people's ideas of wuxia have been influenced by wuxia in the past 50 years, as it's been defined by Hong Kong cinema. But having this kind of historic backdrop we talked about, what inspired me about wuxia was like the way it was defined, let's say 500 years ago, where it was a lot more supernatural. It wasn't just defined to one style of acting. It was actually the cornucopia of the entire spectrum of Chinese metaphysical, philosophical realities. So we're kind of adhering to that lane, and a big thread of that is the Xiao, or the immortal hero subgenre, which is, I'm here in San Francisco for GDC, so you find that this particular sliver has become the most successful subgenre in internet games that's come out of Asia. So we're leaning into that part of it, and because it's called the Immortal Swordsman, we decided to call the company Immortal because I think Immortal is really not just really speaks to the spirit of wuxia, the immortality in all of us. So yes, this is where we get our name.
Great. Would you elaborate what is the Kung Fu mythology?
I talked a little bit about the Kung Fu mythology. I think the original myth of Kung Fu, I say, started the Shaolin Temple. So a lot of this stuff goes back to the Shaolin Temple. So for most martial arts practitioners, whether you're practicing karate or Eastern martial arts, it's pretty safe to say that the roots came from Shaolin. The original myth of Kung Fu, the reason that we're talking about Kung Fu almost like mystical or religious terms, is that the myth of Kung Fu is that when you unite your body, your mind, and your spirit, and you practice it, you can do anything. You can be extraordinary. You can live a life that's beyond ordinary. And that is the myth of Kung Fu. That is the original myth of Kung Fu, that when you do that, when you're able to practice it. And of course, that myth of Kung Fu has been segregated, has been filtered into so many different lanes and slivers, so that the practice, for instance, of meditation and spirituality and ideas and philosophy and service, contribution, separated from the practice of your flesh. Now, it's in the Immortal Storyverse, you're going to see the reunification of how it was originally taught. So it's something I'm super passionate about. The original myth of Kung Fu, really reactivating that. Bruce Lee talks about it. It is like flow like water. Like, I think the favorite part people have about Bruce Lee is this mysticism, is this philosophy. That's why, like, the things that he really championed have always been in the world of the philosophical and spiritual. We have a chance to see that brought together. And just some of those visuals that you guys just shared earlier, these 4 stories. I created something called the Interconnected Universe, where we brought together all the various influences that's ever existed in the genre throughout the past few thousand years. So from grounded action, where kind of like a Cobra Kai would live, or where Bruce Lee has lived, or Jackie Chan, to where Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon would live, where things are becoming more mystical, elevated to some place like where the Immortal Swordsman, the Taoist Immortals would live, or the Matrix would live, and then moving it further to where the intergalactic Buddhist ideals in the universes, the heaven and hells would live. So this is where the Monkey King would live. So through these 4 chapters that you just saw, and through the 4 pillars, we've actually brought together that's everything that's ever existed, but interconnected in one world in a way that hasn't been done in modernity. So that is our unique contribution, so that it's not just a looking backward thing, it's really creating something for the here and now.
That's very interesting. Yeah. So you mentioned earlier about Marvel superheroes. Do you think wuxia and those superheroes creates conflict, or do you think that they actually harmony within?
Well, first of all, I'm a big fan of Marvel. I love Marvel. I'm a big fan of the DC universe's So I don't think there's a conflict at all. The difference is that these also are, I think Marvel and DC are also visions of Western creators. So it comes from science, it comes from science fiction, it comes from different philosophy, Western ideals, and beautiful heroic ideals. And Wuxia comes from Eastern philosophical, spiritual, heroic ideals. So they're very, very complementary. But this part of the kind of heroic identities remain very unexplored. So that's why when we're looking at Everything Everywhere All at Once or Shang-Chi, we're looking at all these things that are trending. They feel fresh, they feel different, they feel like good for the spirit. Just like I think this is a time where the sacred feminine is rising. I think the Eastern ideals are also rising. So I would say these are Eastern superheroes with unique characteristics that have been underexplored and that have led to kind of this imbalance in the world. So in a way, the rise of Wuxia is very much necessary. On this topic of superheroes, just kind of share a little bit of news that we celebrated today. We just hit the trades in Hollywood today that the only person who's been editor-in-chief of both the Marvel and the DC universes has officially joined on as our chief editor for the Immortal Storyverse. So we're taking... So it's, and in talking to Bob Harris, I said, hey Bob, you've done everything you've done in the immortal world, in the geek world. You run Marvel, you run DC, you build these worlds that have now become the #1 and 2 universes in the world. That's really interesting, and I want to learn from your experience and expertise, but I want to deliver something that's completely different, kind of along the lines of what we talked about. And that was kind of the beginning of this next chapter for us. So I think we're really stepping into an extraordinary opportunity.
Tell me more about your company and what kind of projects you're creating.
Well, we are what's considered a transmedia entertainment studio. So, in transmedia, in that we're basically creating a worldview, the stories and the characters that we're populating, because we could actually make comics very, very quickly. You can test out different concepts. You can also go very, very fast and very cost effectively. So when these things have now reached a general fandom, which we have already done, we actually learn a lot from our fans because they're constantly telling us what they like, what they don't like, who they like to follow, and we like to learn and have a conversation with them. And we're kind of through these technology layers, giving them a chance and giving them a seat at the table so that we can actually create together. So we're building this community now, and that's why we're doing some of these. I'm giving them more of these conversations in different parts of the world to bring our fans together. And the next stage for us is a lot more stories, because we're sitting on a couple of thousand characters. So we could easily populate the next 50 years of storytelling, almost at scale. And off of that, we're launching our own film studio. So to Mark's point about kind of creating a boardroom, I was the Chinese kid. I literally grew up in Hollywood. I literally walked and visited all the major studios. I looked at the statues of the Hollywood moguls, the people who've kind of run and created this town. I was like, it was understood very early on that people who look like me wouldn't have a chance to succeed in that world. No, we're going to change that and be a real full-fledged operating new Hollywood studio based on some of these ideals that we're talking about.
You mentioned earlier about the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once. That has won 11 nominations, including Best Picture. So what do you think the future of Asians in Hollywood?
I think it's, this is a historic moment, because it's more than just a moment, it's more than one movie. It's a historic opportunity. So I think Asians clearly, if you sidestep the Asian American conversation, because first of all, the global entertainment industry is global. And from a global perspective, if you consider also South Asia, the Asians are actually 60% of the world's population. So I think the next stage is really for Asian Americans and Asians everywhere to really understand the power that we control as consumers and lead with confidence, and not just for ourselves, lead from our cultural values. And I'm a firm believer that the East has so much to offer to the world, and that we have an opportunity to really make a powerful contribution to global culture. And I consider us as part of that force.
Could you tell us, our audience, how will people find you and find your studio, and more about your business?
Just look for us. For those of you who actually like reading and like reading comic books, who like the graphic novel experience, I would say just come and join us. Follow us on our social media, join us at immortal-studios.com, and get involved in the Immortal community that's upcoming. Because we're actually democratizing the experience, that we're building a community. So for those of you who like characters, who like to get involved in story, you want to be the first to collect different things or to meet like-minded people, to join the Immortal community. It's called the Immortal Order. And that'll be launching later this fall.
And I just met one of your youngest intern.
Yes.
There's an opportunity for people who wants to be part of it.
Yes, we are a growing company, and we're always on the lookout for new talents.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for hosting us, and please a round of applause for Daphne for the interview.
So next will be the Q&A, and I will have you taking over.
Okay, thank you, Daphne.